Hi everyone, and welcome back to my vlog KidLit Corner, episode number 3 today. I'm really thrilled. We have a special guest here today for the first time. It's legend of children's literature world, South Australian author JANEEN Bryan. JANEEN has written well over 100 books, picture books, chapter books, poetry, non-fiction, historical fiction, YA fiction. She's won many awards, including a CBCA honor twice. She's had CBCA shortlistings, notable books, winner of the Speech Pathology Book of the Year. Her books have been translated worldwide in many countries, and she's a real mainstay of anthologies and magazines for poetry and short stories. She's had many poems and short stories, over 200 of them, published in the School magazine and many other magazines and anthologies. She's won a May Gibbs Children's Literature Trust Fellowship, the Adelaide Festival of Literature Carclew Fellowship. She's an ambassador for Raising Literacy Australia and the Little Big Book Club. You might know some of her works that I've got here. Her latest novel is The Fix-It Princess, which came from Walker Books just last year. Or you might know some of her other novels, such as Eloise and the Bucket of Stars. That Boy Jack, or Yong, The Journey of an Unworthy Son, which was recently adapted into a stage play. Or going back a little further, you might know a classic that's still in print and one of my favorites from primary school, Dog Star, which is illustrated by Anne James and part of the Solo series. And I bet you know Where Does Thursday Go? One of her true classics, illustrated by Stephen Michael King. And you definitely know I'm a Dirty Dinosaur by JANEEN and Anne James, who collaborated there. She also has a short story in next month's release, an anthology called Borderlands from Ford Street. She has a romance story in that called Take It on the Cheek. JANEEN loves reading, writing, of course, mosaic making, and she lives and writes from her home near the sea in Adelaide, South Australia. You can visit her on Instagram and Facebook at JANEEN Bryan, and her website's janeenbryan.com. So thank you, JANEEN, for being here today.
Oh, Brenton, it's lovely to speak with you. We had a lovely time together when you were over for your May Gibbs Creative Fellowship time here in Adelaide. The time's whizzed by, I know, but it's been lovely because we sort of forged such a nice contact, and it's actually been lovely to watch your growth and all the activities that you're involved in now. And it's just lovely to have this connection with you and to be able to speak to you today about my books and writing. And thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It's quite amazing, and I know other people say this, but it is quite amazing when someone sort of lists the things that has happened over the years, because as you're going through that road, you're sort of aware of all the highs and the lows and the pitfalls and the learning that goes along. And then when someone sort of puts it in a capsule like that, you sort of think, oh, okay, that's lovely. Thank you.
It's a lot. You're
So thanks.
welcome. No,
Thank you.
you're
Yeah.
very welcome. No, it's a great, very versatile variety body of work. I've definitely been noticing as I've been rereading your books in preparation for this and really poring over them. And all watchers at home, you'll see many of JANEEN's books behind me there. She's written too many titles for me to fully display, but I've done my best, so you can see some highlights behind me.
Yeah.
I think I just want to start by you're a little unusual, I would say, for an author, because when you're a child, you weren't a reader, you weren't a writer, you wanted to be a teacher. So how
Mm.
did writing and reading come about, and did being a
Yeah.
teacher shape that in any way?
Yeah, it is an interesting question because I know that I'm always interested in how people start too, Brenton, because the beginnings are always as interesting as the stories and poems that people create, I find. It was weird in so much as I was bereft. It wasn't that I wasn't a reader so much as that there was nothing to read.
Oh,
And when I say that, it sounds terrible. It sounds like I am one of the dirty dinosaurs from way back. But it was I sort of, I grew up in a household that didn't have books, really. I grew up in a time when at school there were only readers, and we were forbidden to read ahead.
oh,
Um, and also we had no school library. Well, actually, when I say we had no school library, there was apparently a room that had some brown paper covered books in them. And it was only in year 7 that we actually went in there and I was able to pull out a book. We were told to pull out one book and we were to write about it. And so now I know about pulleys and levers because I didn't even know what I was pulling out. We just had to grab a book. And that was sort of it. And I was never taken to a library.
mm,
I can only remember one book that my mother may have read to me, which is still a favorite of mine. That's called The Story of Ping, which is a lovely little duck
oh,
story set in China. And that always sort of wells me up. And I think it's, partly because of that nostalgia.
mm,
Um, but so if you, and also to get books, I wanted books. I desperately wanted to read, but there wasn't the outlet. There wasn't, I borrowed books from kids next door. I swapped mum's biscuits to get a book to read. So in a way, I sort of feel as though all those books that authors talk about as part of their childhood, I'm always doing that catch up. I'm always sort of thinking, oh, the secret garden. Everyone knew about the secret garden. We had a lovely garden in our house, but it wasn't secret
yeah,
and it wasn't a book. So, it's just I can get quite, if I allow myself, I can get quite gulpy about the fact that, there wasn't this, obviously I wanted to read, but it just wasn't around. So, I guess in a way, becoming an author is a really weird thing. I did want to become a teacher, you're quite right. I really did. I wanted to be a teacher ever since year 3. So then that was all I thought of. And that was my journey, was just to sort of get on the road. And I think probably it was I was 16, and at that stage it was the last year that the Teachers College in Adelaide was accepting teacher students so I left in year 11. So I didn't do matriculation. I left in year 11 and did 2 years teacher training. So I was 18 when I sort of stared my year 5 class in the face. And but that's and really I came to it sounds so strange now, but I came to class and teaching with no real knowledge. I didn't know books. I didn't know structure. I didn't know reading. Something was inside of me, obviously,
yeah,
but I didn't know. And so when I started reading to my kids in class and introduced to a school library, that's where the magic happened. That's where I started to think, like I would read Storm Boy and cry with the children. And so that was pretty much how I really got aware of books and sort of the writing aspect, I suppose. But once again, I didn't sort of say I'm going to be a writer or I'm going to,
mm,
sort of get into this area, because I was simply going to be a teacher.
mm,
And I don't mean that, in a derogatory way. I mean, that was all I was thinking of. Yeah. And then so reading came through teaching, I think.
mm,
Reading and writing. And my world's just been open, open ever since then. I can't be more grateful. But, and then we went on from there. And once again, if I hadn't been teaching, I wouldn't have met this particular teacher who, in fact, started his own publishing company. So that was Rod Martin of Era Publications. And
um,
just, luck plays
yeah,
an incredible part in this game. And so just knowing that person, it just made it just that little bit easier for me to sort of poke a manuscript in his direction.
Mm.
And I remember it was about knees because I had a young daughter at that time, and she was of that age where all she felt that she could see was knees. And so I wrote a story about knees, and, you know, it was pretty horrible, I can imagine. I don't know what it's yeah. Yeah, I mean, anyway, I know there is a book actually out recently, I think, about that. But anyway, so I offered this, you know, piece of work to this publisher, and he rightly turned it down. But luck, he said, "Would you like to try and write for other books?" And that was the educational side of things. So I felt, in a way, that when I started writing for that educational publisher, I learned a lot. Yeah, I learned a lot, and I know that you were curious about what I learned from that, from the educational side of it. I'm still writing for educational publishers, but in those early days, what I think it gave me um, is confidence to write for a start.
Mm.
It was a look at brevity. It was a look at because some of the very early ones for the very young ones were 16 pages, so you really had to snatch and grab and use words crisply and concisely, and then have a twist at the end. So, you know, you can't say that that doesn't teach you something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's and then of course I started realizing that I loved grappling with these words, and then in that educational um, time that I was with ERA, I spent more time with ERA. I ended up writing, and as you say, I'm a bit of a bitzer, really. I, you know, write a lot and a lot of different things. But in that time, I was writing fiction. I was writing poetry. I was writing fables and short novels, and how to do things, how to make craft things, you know, history things. So the range was wide, but that suited me, and I think it's just who I am. Yeah. So I'm not a stickler for one particular
Yeah.
thing, except at that stage and for a long time, short works were my go-to things. Mm.
I want to
Mm.
mention some of the early titles. My
Mm.
Sister Learns Ballet,
Yes,
Flemings of Hopetown, which is a
yes.
non-fiction book.
Which is this one, which
Um,
I
yeah.
actually researched and wrote myself, and published it myself. This was I was 4 when I went to these sisters. They weren't looking like that at that time,
Yeah.
but they were spinster sisters who had never trained as teachers, but they ran what was called, if you know what I mean when I say a dame school, like a little school in a church school hall. And at
Um,
that stage, yeah, at that stage, the kindergartens in those areas where I was living were full. Post-war population boom, everything. And so there was no room in the kindergarten for me. So I was sent as a little 3.5, 4-year-old to this school. Well, it was you were taught Latin and French and sewing,
yeah.
and this lady, Miss Fleming, she looked after the little ones, so we called her Little Miss Fleming, and Dorothy was the sterner one, the controller. She looked after the older children, and there was quite some notable people there, but there was no room in the hall for all of us, so the little ones were taken outside on the tennis court to learn their lessons on sitting on a form. It's quite bizarre. Anyway, they made such an impression on me, Brenton, that for years later, I was only there for 1 year
Yeah.
as a
Oh,
4-year-old, and I
wow.
went to primary school, and they had such an impact on my life because they read to me, and they had this beautiful, beautiful polished voices, and I just drank it in. And so later, I actually did an archaeological dig on their home, which had been demolished, and came up with air raid tunnels, and I wrote this history to acknowledge them, And it took me about 5 or 6 years to do that. And so that was where that one came from. So it was a very different, it was a labour of love, actually, because I'd never done any research. There were no computers, so everything. And then, of course, as you can imagine, the girls who went there, and it's primarily girls or people who didn't fit quite into the scheme of primary schools, they often changed their names, if they got married. So finding them out was a real difficulty. So I worked on that, and that was, one of my, I think an achievement for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What an
But I
intriguing backstory. Wow.
isn't it? Oh, there
That
was
is
more to tell, I can tell you.
fascinating. Wow.
Digging and yes, yeah, getting permission to start the dig
Yeah.
as well, Anyway,
Oh,
yeah.
wonderful.
Sorry, and you
Wow.
yeah.
And you wrote, well, many, like you say, many of the early readers are school readers, and I know a lot like about South Australia's colonial years in a book in a
Yeah.
series and things. Yeah.
Yeah, that one, it's another bit of luck too,
Mm,
Brenton, because I was going to the Fellowship of Australian Writers. I was just tentatively trying to find out what I can do, who I could touch base with, and there was no writers' centres. So I was learning the craft as I went along, just going to the how to do books in the library. But I met up with a lovely guy called Max Colwell, and he was a great historian here in South Australia. And he was offered a job to write this particular book. And he told the publishers that he wouldn't. He didn't feel as though he had other things on the go and so forth. And he said to me, would I do it? Oh, my mouth dropped open. Me? What? And I was terrified. But what it did was it taught me how to research, but it also taught me once again that brevity. How do you make, a history into such a short book? Anyway, they had one of each state eventually, and they said that was pretty good. So I was pleased about that. But once again, it was contacts, it was network, it was pushing yourself out there.
yeah.
And that's why that happened.
And that's
Mm.
still important today, I guess, the
Oh, very
contact
much
side of
so.
it. Yeah.
Very much so. And there are more, there are more places to go to. Sometimes it's a bit overwhelming, I think. There are so
Mm,
many opportunities and courses and online and face to face if it's not COVID. And, it's all of those. It is a lot, actually. And sometimes I think for the younger ones, maybe it's a bit too overwhelming
yeah.
and it's a bit hard to get into publishing, get into the world of publishing. But
Definitely.
yes, so that's how that one came about, and it actually started off my love of Australian history. So
Yeah.
once again, another sideline. It's the growing, isn't it, as you go along?
And the
Mm.
avenues that it takes you that you might not anticipate your career going, which I think that's
Never,
really
never, and
interesting. Yeah, you never know
it
what's
is.
going to come up.
No, I love trees, and I think to myself, well, this is where you started, but look at all the branches, look at all the twigs, look at all the leaves, look how
Yeah,
big it's getting. Yeah.
exactly. So you were doing this, you're writing for the educational publishers. You were,
Mm.
I know you left teaching to be a full-time writer in 1990, but you'd been
Yeah.
part-time teaching a little bit before that. And I think you're writing poems for people, messages in greeting cards. Um,
Mhm.
I know a big highlight for me is you ended up writing several scripts for Here's Humphrey,
Oh,
TV
yes,
show
yes,
as well. So
yes.
how do you go from I'm going to make that jump, I'm going to make the jump into full-time writing and write whatever I can? Like how does that sort of process
Yeah.
go?
Well, once again, for everyone, it's very, very different. It was, as you say, 1990, and it was getting to the stage. I was actually doing part-time teacher librarian at that point at a small Catholic school. And the time was ticking by whereby the principal, who was a very creative, supportive man, was having to leave because his tenure was up. Um, Also, it was a time where I'd been published to to a degree where I thought if I don't commit myself completely, I may regret it. The other thing was that we had, and this is a financial thing that comes into every aspect of creativity, is that we had paid the mortgage of our house. And I had two daughters who were at that stage that they could have gone to university, but they each chose different ways of heading. So it wasn't, there weren't university fees or anything like that. So, and then the final thing was I had this tiny little saying that said, look before you leap, but if you're going to leap, don't look too long.
Mm.
So I leapt. And so in 1990, I did leap, and I left full-time permanent, because that was a permanent job. I
Mm.
left that, but I was determined that I would do everything in my power to make sure that I was not relying on my husband for all the income. And so that's when I started writing. I wrote, was in New Zealand, I wrote about bungee jumping, so that I just started. I got, I trawled magazines, Women's Weekly, you name it. I wrote a lot for all those things. I wrote personal poems. I went around to shops and said, do you need anything written for your, to advertise or anything? So I was really just bobbing about in a sea
Mm.
of how can I keep my burgeoning career up and running by doing anything I could think of to do with words.
Mm.
At the same time, I was writing for the education department, with the education publications, and then of course I was getting some books published in trade
Mm.
as well, and school magazine. Yeah. So it was a case of me being determined as a woman, I think, Brenton,
Mm.
not to sort of say, okay, I'm going to give up my job and my husband can support me. That was a
Mm.
very, very strong feeling, it still is, that I believe that I wanted to become a writer in my own way and to be able to support myself. And that's terribly hard for a lot of people. I know it is, but somehow it's
Mm.
been that I've been able to do mostly, okay.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love that. That's very inspiring and how proactive you are. And I know a lot of people watching this must be thinking the same, maybe in your shoes that you were then, that they want to make the go of it and not be reliant on their partner solely.
Mm,
But it
mm.
can feel like such a risk to do
Yes,
it. But I
yes,
love what you say.
yes,
Don't look too long before you.
yes.
That's great.
That did stand me in good stead, because something has to be the main trigger. Something
Mm.
has to get you going, and writing is a risk. The
Yeah.
whole world of publishing is a risk. Um, and not every story is a good story, but I still believe it. I think it's that belief, isn't it? It's that belief that if there's something there, I think it's up to you. And that's another credo that I have, if it's to be, it's up to me. And so I think if you do have that sense of there is something, um, then it is up to you. It is up to you
Yeah.
to do the very best you can, and therefore you've got to search the avenues and so on. And that's the other thing about writing too, Brenton, is that we write to be read. But there is something that I always think about, and I don't know that I hear that too many other authors talk about it. They probably do, but it's that sense of all the stuff that we have inside us that if we didn't create would stay inside us. And how sad.
Yes.
Because when you start writing, you think, oh my gosh, I hadn't thought of that before. And writing brings it out in you, or art or whatever. And so for me, that fascinates me, that whole area of who we are, what we still have inside of us if we let it out.
Mm.
And that's why, letting it out is risky, because we always criticize ourselves, and so, but it's a fascinating area of what do I have inside of me that I don't know yet.
Yeah.
and that's why I don't stop.
Absolutely. Definitely. You mentioned the school magazine. You've
Yeah.
you've written many, many short stories and plays and poems that have been published in the school magazine for a long time. But what what importance does the school magazine give to you for your career personally and for Australian stories at large?
Yeah. Um, I think it's one of the most valuable things that we've got as
Yeah.
far as linking books and poems, particularly because there's not many avenues for poetry, linking to the classroom, which has such a wide audience. So we're very grateful for the classrooms and the schools that, subscribe and get that magazine in. So from that point of view, it's hugely important because they get a taste that they can share, that the teachers can work with. There's a variety of things within each magazine, and I just absolutely value the school magazine
Mm.
immensely, as most authors and illustrators do. For me, it's as you say, I've had over 200 poems and stories, and they still have had
Mm.
several accepted recently. Um, and I think for me, it started way, way back, and it was just one of those things that I had must have come across somewhere along the line and thought I would write something. And I had written some poetry, and so the first two things I had accepted were two poems. That blew me out the water for a
Yeah.
start. This is wonderful. And then then I wrote a story, and the story was about a time where I was down at a sort of a beach way on York Peninsula.
Mm.
We were there on school the summer holidays. It was a lovely rocky bay with a lovely curve of white sand and sand dunes.
Mm.
And I was clambering over the rocks like a goat, loving it, and then looking in rock pools and all the rest of it. And all of a sudden, I saw two men in suits. Now, you don't wear suits down the beach.
Mm.
So here there were two men leaping through the sand dunes, and this was a bit weird. So I was watching them for a bit, and then I saw a dog. And this dog, oh, can you picture this? It came bounding through over the rocks. It was a red setter, so the sun was shining, the red fur was flying out, and it just looked like it was there to have fun. And then came a shout from these men, "Don't go near." I went to pat it. "Don't go near it," they shouted. And then the next thing, the dog leapt. There was a gunshot. The dog went into the water from the rocks, and then the bay became clouded in blood. The dog was rabies. It had rabies. It was frothing at the mouth. It would have been a horrendous thing if I'd touched it and patted it. So that was a story that had stayed with me, a very dramatic story that stayed with me ever since I was about 9. That was the story that I wrote, but I didn't write it as I didn't write it, as it exactly happened. In fact, I called it The Day I Didn't Pat the Dog. And I thought that
Mm.
was very clever because it taught me that you can twist a title and make it sound much more interesting.
Yes.
And that's the first story that was published. And from then on, I thought, I can mine all of these things that happened to me.
Mm.
And at that stage, I don't think I was really as aware of that. Once again, it was this, there were no, there were no groups, there was no writers center,
Mm.
there were no people that I knew who were writing. So it was sort of learning on the go and saying to yourself, okay, well, this works, maybe I can do it again,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And so the school magazine, firstly, it's a quality magazine. It really has brilliant stuff in it. And because you're given, several copies for yourself,
Mm.
the joy for me too is, okay, I know what I've written, but look what everyone else has written.
Yeah.
and you read everyone else's stories or poems or articles, and you learn. It's just fantastic. I've got boxes of them, and I treasure them. So first of all, so they're a valuable, high quality magazine. They the ability to put them into sort of areas that suit particular year levels, wonderful.
Mhm.
They align to the curriculum, which is helpful for teachers. Um, and they're ethical. They are wonderfully ethical people and a publishing company because and also they pay very well, which is terribly important. We haven't actually touched money yet, but they pay well. And the other thing is too, if they republish or reprint, they will pay the same amount. So I value them. And I've been part of some of their celebrations, and I've done a workshop for them over in Sydney. The people themselves, absolutely wonderful to work with. And they are just such creative, broad-minded, wonderful, as I said, wonderful people to work with. So yes, I think everyone who's had anything to do with them, you're nodding and so, they just are.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. It's a joy. And also, they might accept something and it may or may not come out for 12 months, but if they accept it, you've got a pretty good chance of it being published.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think also there's
Yeah. So
yeah. I was just going to say there's not that many outlets for writers,
no,
short stories and poems. So
no,
that's sort of a pinnacle if you
no,
get something in the school magazine. And as you say, the payment,
absolutely.
obviously very important.
Yeah, it is. It is very, very important. And it comes quickly. Whereas if you get something published, in a trade or educational title, we all know how long that takes to
Yeah.
get after it's been published, So once royalties kick in, it still takes, 6 months to get more royalties. So whilst you are waiting for that, you get these
Yeah.
little pieces coming through, and yeah, it's marvelous. Yeah. And it's encouraging. That's the
Yes.
other thing. It's encouraging. And it doesn't matter how long you've been writing or how many books you've done. We all need that bit of encouragement. We all need it every now and again. I had a bit of a slump towards the end of last year
Mm.
where I thought, will I ever get published again?
Mm.
And I just thought, right, buckle up, put your seatbelt on again, Janine, and just, go. And then that's that. We
Mm.
all know it. It's that persistence. It's that, oh my God, I feel awful. This is terrible. I'm down in the dumps. Nothing's going to happen. I've been waiting so long, and then it's come back, and all right, here we go again. So that persistence has paid off, and I'm now in the role of getting several books published. So that's good. So
That's great to hear. That's really inspiring. Inspiring to hear, I think, as well.
oh yeah, and it does help when you are with groups of like-minded people. I think when I started finding out that there were other people around and joining groups and going to workshops once they started happening and going to festivals and meeting the people, I think that's really where it starts to make you feel as though you're a writer, because
Mm.
sometimes you're a bit hesitant about saying, am I a writer? Even if you've had a couple of things published, you might still say, can I put on my aeroplane form, what's your job,
Yeah.
right? So it just takes that sense of camaraderie, and you're in it together, and that it really does help immensely. And people say that all the time, and they say it because it's true. They say cliches are cliche, but it's true, and that's where it becomes a cliche,
Mm.
because it is true, and it's true about that too, having people that understand you, because even though you've got partners or friends or family, and they might be the most caring, supportive people, but you talk to a writer an illustrator, and they just
Yeah.
sit
They
there
get
and
it.
we get it,
We
we
get
get
it.
it, we
Yeah.
understand. We
Yeah.
understand, our heart's breaking for you, or we're cheering for you.
Yeah.
Or maybe you change this line, or have you thought about doing it this way or that
Mm.
way?
Yeah,
Can't take that away from it. It's just part and parcel of it. It's just so valuable.
definitely.